help. Food was good. Thank you. Welcome back for part 2 of chapter 5. Where did we leave off? Well, very instantaneously, somewhere in here. And this is the kind of content you can expect from really reads books. Found it. And Billy traveled in time to the zoo on Tralfamadore. He was 44 years old, on display under a geodesic dome. He was reclining on the lounge chair, which had been his cradle during the long trip through space. He was naked. The Tralfamadorians were interested in his body. All of it. There were thousands of them outside, holding up their little hands so that their eyes could see him. Billy had been on Tralfamadore for 6 Earthling months now. He was used to the crowd. Escape was out of the question. The atmosphere outside the dome was cyanide, and Earth was 446. Well, if that's a billion, it's a billion. Trillion. What's after a trillion? Quadrillion. Okay. So 446 quadrillion, 120 trillion miles away. Oh, that's where Tralfamadore is. It's only 446 quadrillion. I was just trying to do some math in my head. Where is it? 0, 0, 0, 0. Then you got the trillion there. That's a quadrillion. So 446 quadrillion. Let me just try that again. Escape was out of the question. The atmosphere outside the dome was cyanide, and Earth was 446 quadrillion, 120 trillion miles away. Billy was displayed there in the zoo in a simulated Earthling habitat. Most of the furnishings had been stolen from the Sears Roebuck warehouse in Iowa City, Iowa. There was a color television set and a crunch that could be converted into a bed. Wow. My dyslexia is going around bad here. Let's take a look here. What it actually said was there was a color television set and a couch that could be converted into a bed. There were end tables and lamps and ashtrays on them by the couch. There was a home bar and 2 stools. There was a little pool table. There was wall-to-wall carpeting in federal gold, except in the kitchen and bathroom areas, and over the iron manhole cover in the center of the floor. There were magazines arranged in a fan on the coffee table in front of the couch. There was a stereophonic phonograph. The phonograph worked. The television didn't. There was a picture of one cowboy killing another one pasted to the television tube. So it goes. There were no walls in the dome, no place for Billy to hide. The mint green bathroom fixtures were right out in the open. Billy got off his lounge chair now and went into the bathroom, took a leak. The crowd went wild. Billy brushed his teeth on Tralfamador, put in his partial denture, and went into his kitchen. His bottle gas range and his refrigerator, his dishwasher, that were mint green too. There was a picture painted on the door of the refrigerator. The refrigerator had come that way. It was a picture of a gay 90s couple on a bicycle built for two. Billy looked at the picture now, tried to think of something about the couple. Nothing came to him. There didn't seem to be anything to think about those two people. Billy ate a good breakfast from cans. He washed his cup and plate and knife and fork and spoon and saucepan and put them away. Then he did exercises he had learned in the army. Straddle jumps, deep knee bends, sit-ups, and push-ups. Most Tralfamadorians had no way of knowing Billy's body and face were not beautiful. They supposed that he was a splendid specimen. This had a pleasant effect on Billy, who began to enjoy his body for the first time. He showered after his exercises and trimmed his toenails. He shaved and sprayed deodorant under his arms, while a zoo guide on a raised platform outside explained what Billy was doing and why. The guide was lecturing telepathically, simply standing there, sending out thought waves to the crowd. On the platform with him was the little keyboard instrument with which he would relay questions to Billy from the crowd. Now, the first question came from the speaker on the television set. "Are you happy here?" "About as happy as I was on Earth," said Billy Pilgrim, which was true. There were 5 sexes on Tralfamador, each of them performing a step necessary to the creation of a new individual. They looked identical to Billy because their sex differences were all in the 4th dimension. One of the biggest moral bombshells handed to Billy by the Tralfamadorians, incidentally, had to do with sex on Earth. They said their flying saucer crews had identified no fewer than 7 sexes on Earth, each essential to reproduction. Again, Billy couldn't possibly imagine what 5 of those 7 sexes had to do with the making of a baby, since they were sexually active only in the 4th dimension. The Tralfamadorians tried to give Billy clues that would help him imagine sex in the invisible dimension. They told him that There could be no earthling babies without male homosexuals. There could be babies without female homosexuals. There couldn't be babies without women over 65 years old. There could be babies without men over 65. There couldn't be babies without other babies who had lived an hour or less after birth, and so on. It was gibberish to Billy. There was a lot that Billy said that was gibberish to the Tralfamadorians, too. They couldn't imagine what time looked like to him. Billy had given up on explaining that. The guide outside had to explain as best he could. The guide invited the crowd to imagine that they were looking across a desert at a mountain range on a day that was twinkling bright and clear. They could look at a peak or a bird or a cloud, at a stone right in front of them, or even down into a canyon behind them. But among them was this poor earthling, and his head was encased in a steel sphere, which he could never take off. There was only one eye hole through which he could look, and welded to that eye hole were 6 feet of pipe. This was only the beginning of Billy's miseries in the metaphor. He was also strapped to a steel lattice, which was bolted to a flat car on rails, and there was no way he could turn his head or touch the pipe. The far end of the pipe rested on a bipod, which was also bolted to the flat car. All Billy could see was the little dot at the end of the pipe. He didn't know he was on a flat car, didn't even know there was anything peculiar about his situation. The flat car sometimes crept, sometimes went extremely fast, often stopped, went uphill, downhill, around curves, along straightaways. Whatever poor Billy saw through that pipe, he had no choice but to say to himself, "That's life." Billy expected the Tralfamadorians to be baffled and alarmed by all the wars and other forms of murder on Earth. He expected them to fear that the earthling combination of ferocity and spectacular weaponry might eventually destroy part or maybe all of an innocent universe. Science fiction had led him to expect that. But the subject of war never came up until Billy brought it up himself. Somebody in the zoo crowd asked him through the lecturer what the most valuable thing he had learned on Tralfamador was, and Billy replied, "How the inhabitants of a whole planet can live in peace. As you know, I am from a planet that has been engaged in senseless slaughter since the beginning of time. I myself have seen the bodies of schoolgirls who were boiled alive in a water tower by my own countrymen, who were proud of fighting pure evil at the time." This was true. Billy saw the boiled bodies in Dresden. "And I have lit my way in a prison at night with candles from the fat of human beings who were butchered by the brothers and fathers of those schoolgirls who were boiled. Earthlings must be the terrors of the universe. If other planets aren't now in danger from Earth, they soon will be. So tell me the secret so I can take it back to Earth and save us all. How can a planet live in peace? Billy felt that he had spoken soaringly. He was baffled when he saw the Tralfamadorians close their little hands on their eyes. He knew from past experience what that meant. He was being stupid. Would you mind telling me? He said to the guide, much deflated. What was so stupid about that? We know how the universe ends, said the guide, and Earth has nothing to do with it, except that it gets wiped out too. How does the universe end? Said Billy. We blow it up, experimenting with new fuels for our flying saucers. A Tralfamadorian test pilot presses a starter button, and the whole universe disappears. So it goes. If you know this, said Billy, isn't there some way you can prevent it? Can't you keep the pilot from pressing the button? He has always pressed it, and he always will. We always let him, and we always will let him. The moment is structured that way. So, said Billy gropingly, I suppose that the idea of preventing war on Earth is stupid too. Of course. But you do have a peaceful planet here. Today we do. On other days we have wars as horrible as any I've seen or read about. There isn't anything we can do about them, so we simply don't look at them. We ignore them. We spend eternity looking at pleasant moments, like today at the zoo. Isn't this a nice moment? Yes. That's one thing Earthlings might learn to do, if they tried hard enough. Ignore the awful times, and concentrate on the good ones. Said Billy Pilgrim. Shortly after he went to sleep that night, Billy traveled in time to another moment, which was quite nice. His wedding night, the former Valencia Merble. He had been out of the Veterans Hospital for 6 months. He was all well. He had graduated from the Ilium School of Optometry, third in his class of 47. Now, he was in bed with Valencia in a delightful studio apartment, which was built on the end of a wharf on Cape Ann, Massachusetts. Across the water were lights of Gloucester. Billy was on top of Valencia, making love to her. One result of this act would be the birth of Robert Pilgrim, who would become a problem in high school, but who would then straighten out as a member of the famous Green Berets. Valencia wasn't a time traveler, but she did have a lively imagination. While Billy was making love to her, she imagined that she was a famous woman in history. She was being Queen Elizabeth I of England, and Billy was supposedly Christopher Columbus. Billy made a noise like a small rusty hinge. He had just emptied his seminal vesicles into Valencia, had contributed his share of the Green Beret. According to the Tralfamadorians, of course, the Green Beret would have 7 parents in all. Now he rolled off his huge wife, whose rapt expression did not change when he departed. He lay with the buttons of his spine along the edge of the mattress, folded his hands behind his head. He was rich now. He had been rewarded for marrying a girl nobody in his right mind would have married. His father-in-law had given him a new Buick Roadmaster, an all-electric home, and had made him manager of his most prosperous office, his Ilium office, where Billy could expect to make at least $30,000 a year. That was good. His father had only been a barber. As his mother said, the pilgrims are coming up in the world. The honeymoon was taking place in the bittersweet mysteries of Indian summer in New England. The lovers' apartment had one romantic wall, which was all French doors. They opened onto a balcony and the oily harbor beyond. A green and orange dragger, black in the night, grumbled and drummed past their balcony, not 30 feet from their wedding bed. It was going to sea with only its running lights on. Its empty holds were resonant, made the song of the engines rich and loud. The wharf began to sing the same song, and then the honeymooners' headboard sang too, and it continued to sing long after the dragger was gone. "Thank you," said Valencia at last. The headboard was singing a mosquito song. "You're welcome. It was nice." And she began to cry. "What's the matter?" "I'm so happy." "Good. I never thought anybody would marry me." Said Billy Pilgrim. "I'm going to lose weight for you," she said. "What?" "I'm going to go on a diet. I'm going to become beautiful for you." "I like you just the way you are." "Do you really?" "Really," said Billy Pilgrim. He had already seen a lot of their marriage, thanks to time travel. Knew that it was going to be at least bearable all the way. A great motor yacht named the it's German. The Scheherazade. A great motor yacht named the Scheherazade now slid past the marriage bed. The song its engine sang was a very low organ note. All her lights were on. Two beautiful people, a young man and a young woman in evening clothes, were at the rail in the stern, loving each other and their dreams and the lake. They were honeymooning too. They were Lance Rumford of Newport, Rhode Island, and his bride, the former Cynthia Landry, who had been a childhood sweetheart of John F. Kennedy in Hyannisport, Massachusetts. There was a slight coincidence here. Billy Pilgrim would later share a hospital room with Rumford's uncle, Professor Bertram Copeland Rumford of Harvard, official historian, of the United States Air Force. When the people, when the when the beautiful people were past, Valencia questioned her funny-looking husband about war. It was a simple-minded thing for a female earthling to do, to associate sex and glamour with war. "Do you ever think about the war?" she said, laying a hand on his thigh. "Sometimes," said Billy Pilgrim. "I look at you sometimes," said Valencia, "and I get a funny feeling that you're just full of secrets." "I'm not," said Billy. This was a lie, of course. He hadn't told anybody about the time traveling he'd done, about Tralfamadore, and so on. "You must have secrets about the war, or not secrets, I guess, but you don't want to talk about? But things you don't want to talk about." "No." "I'm proud of you. I'm proud you were a soldier. Do you know that?" "Good." "Was it awful?" "Sometimes." A crazy thought now occurred to Billy. The truth of it startled him. It would make a good epitaph for Billy Pilgrim. And for me, too. "Would you talk about war now if I wanted you to?" said Valencia. In a tiny cavity of her great body, she was assembling materials for a green beret. "It would sound like a dream," said Billy. "Other people's dreams aren't very interesting, usually." "I heard you tell Father one time about a German firing squad." She was referring to the execution of poor old Edgar Derby. Um, Everything was beautiful and nothing hurt." "You had to bury him?" "Yes." "Did he see you with your shovels before he was shot?" "Yes." "Did he say anything?" "No." "Was he scared?" "They had him doped up. He was sort of glassy-eyed." "And they pinned a target on him?" "A piece of paper," said Billy. "He got out of bed, said, 'Excuse me,' went to the darkness of the bathroom to take a leak. He groped for the light, realized, as he felt the rough walls, that he had traveled back to 1944, to the prison hospital again. The candle in the hospital had gone out. Poor old Edgar Derby had fallen asleep on the cot next to Billy's. Billy was out of bed, groping along a wall, trying to find a way out because he had to take a leak so badly. He suddenly found a door, which opened, let him reel out into the prison night. Billy was loony with time travel and morphine. He delivered himself to a barbed wire fence, which snagged him in a dozen places. Billy tried to back away from it, but the barbs wouldn't let go. So Billy did a silly little dance with the fence, taking a step this way, then that way, then returning to the beginning again. A Russian, himself out in the night to take a leak, saw Billy dancing from the other side of the fence. He came over to the curious scarecrow, tried to talk with it gently, asked it what country it was from. The scarecrow paid no attention.
Hello? Oh my god, it looks great! Oh my god, it's a new place!
Yeah.
God, I had a wonderful, unusual, top-of-the-line date.
That's very good, Ma.
Look at you. Are you online?
Well, I'm doing a YouTube show.
Am I on right now?
I'm reading my...
But am I being taped?
I'm in the middle of my filming. I only have a couple...
Really? Am I being taped?
I only have a couple more pages.
But did I just say something on there?
It's just... Just let me read for another 20 minutes here. I only have 20 minutes to go. I'm in the middle of it.
Can you pause it?
No. You got it right now afterwards.
Okay.
Jesus Christ. Okay. The scarecrow paid no attention and went on dancing. So the Russian undid the snags one by one, and the scarecrow danced off into the night again without a word of thanks. The Russian waved to him and called after him in Russian, "Goodbye," which I suppose is "Do svidaniya." Am I right? Oh, what a nice little Russian that guy was. Billy took his pecker out there in prison night and peed on the ground. Then he put it away again, more or less, and contemplated a new problem. Where had he come from? And where should he go now? That's an old problem. Somewhere in the night there were cries of grief. Nothing better to do. Billy shuffled in their direction. He wondered what tragedy so many had found to lament out of doors. Billy was approaching, without knowing it, the back of the latrine. It consisted of a one-rail fence with 12 buckets underneath it. The fence was sheltered on 3 sides by a screen of scrap lumber and flattened tin cans. The open side faced the black tar paper wall of the shed where the feast had taken place. Billy moved along the screen and reached a point where he could see a message freshly painted on the tar paper wall. The words were written in the same pink paint which had brightened the set for Cinderella. Billy's perceptions were so unreliable that he saw the words as hanging in the air, painted on a transparent curtain, perhaps. And there were lovely silver dots on the curtain, too. These were really nail heads holding the tar paper to the shed. Billy could not imagine how the curtain was supported in nothingness, and he supposed that the magic curtain and the theatrical grief were part of some religious ceremony he knew nothing about. Here is what the message said. Please leave the latrine as tidy as you found it. Billy looked inside the latrine. The wailing was coming from in there. The place was crammed with Americans who had taken their pants down. The welcome feast had made them as sick as volcanoes. The buckets were full and had been kicked over. An American near Billy wailed that he had excreted everything but his brains. Moments later, he said, "There they go, there they go." He meant his brains. That was I. That was me. That was the author of this book. In case you forgot, Kurt was really there in Dresden. Lest you forget. Oh, man. That is great. That is great. Billy reeled away from his vision of hell. He passed 3 Englishmen who were watching the excrement festival from a distance. They were catatonic with disgust. "Button your pants," said one as Billy went by. So Billy buttoned his pants. He came to the door of the little hospital by accident. He went through the door and found himself honeymooning again. Going to the bathroom and back to bed with his bride on Cape Ann. "I missed you," said Valencia. "I missed you," said Billy Pilgrim. Billy and Valencia went to sleep, nestled like spoons, and Billy traveled in time back to the train ride he had taken in 1944 from maneuvers in South Carolina to his father's funeral in Ilium. He hadn't seen Europe or combat yet. This was still in the days of steam locomotives. Billy had to change trains a lot. All the trains were slow. The coaches stunk of coal smoke and rationed tobacco and rationed booze and the farts of people eating wartime food. The upholstery of the iron seats was bristly, and Billy couldn't sleep much. He got to sleep soundly when he was only 3 hours from Ilium. With his legs splayed toward the entrance of the busy dining car, the porter woke him up when the train reached Ilium. Billy staggered off with his duffel bag, and then he stood on the station platform next to the porter, trying to wake up. "Have a good nap, did you?" said the porter. "Yes," said Billy. "Man," said the porter, "you sure had a hard on." At 3 in the morning on Billy's morphine night in prison, a new patient was carried in to the hospital by 2 lusty Englishmen. He was tiny. He was Paul Lazaro, the polka-dotted car thief from Cicero, Illinois. He had been caught stealing cigarettes from under the pillow of an Englishman. The Englishman, half asleep, had broken Lazaro's arm and knocked him unconscious. The, the Englishman who had done this was hoping to carry Lazaro in now. He had fiery red hair and no eyebrows. He had been Cinderella's blue fairy godmother in the play. Now he supported his half of Lazaro with one hand while he closed the door behind himself with the other. "Doesn't weigh as much as a chicken," he said. The Englishman with Lazaro's feet was the colonel who had given Billy his knockout shot. The blue fairy godmother was embarrassed, and angry too. "If I'd known I was fighting a chicken," he said, "I wouldn't have fought so hard." The blue fairy godmother spoke frankly about how disgusting all the Americans were. Weak, smelly, self-pitying, a pack of sniveling, dirty, thieving bastards, he said. They were worse than the bleeding Russians. Do seem a scruffy lot, the colonel agreed. The German major came in now. Let me get the charger.
Okay.
Did you eat? You hungry?
I'm not hungry. I had a really nice day. Really nice day with this guy. Appreciates me and thinks he loves me.
That's great.
Yeah.
Alright, we'll hang out in just like 10 minutes here.
Okay.
Almost done. I had to plug in the old camera machine. Yeah. Alright. The German major came in now. He considered the Englishmen as close friends. He visited them nearly every day and played games with them, lectured to them on German history, played their piano, gave them lessons in conversational German. He told them often that, if it weren't for their civilized company, he would go mad. His English was splendid. What did I do with that? I know. He was apologetic about the Englishmen's having to put up with the American enlisted men. He promised them that they would not be inconvenienced for more than a day or two, that the Americans would soon be shipped to Dresden as contract labor. He had a monograph with him, published by the German Association of Prison Officials. It was a report on the behavior in Germany of American enlisted men as prisoners of war. It was written by a former American who had risen high in the German Ministry of Propaganda. His name was Howard W. Campbell, Jr. He would later hang himself while awaiting trial as a war criminal. So it goes. While the British colonel set Lazaro's broken arm and mixed plaster for the cast, the German major translated out loud passages from Howard W. Campbell Jr.'s monograph. Campbell, who had been a fairly well-known playwright at one time, his opening line was this one: America is the wealthiest nation on earth, but its people are mainly poor, and poor Americans are urged to hate themselves. They quote the American humorist Ken Hubbard: "It ain't no disgrace to be poor, but it might as well be." It is in fact a crime for an American to be poor, even though America is a nation of poor. Every other nation has folk traditions of men who were poor but extremely wise and virtuous, and therefore more estimable than anyone with power and gold. No such tales are told by the American poor. They mock themselves and glorify their betters. The meanest eating or drinking establishment establishment, owned by a man who is himself poor, is very likely to have a sign on his wall asking this cruel question: "If you're so smart, why ain't you rich?" There will also be an American flag no larger than a child's hand, glued to a lollipop stick and flying from the cash register. The author of the monograph was a native of Schenectady, New York, which, if you haven't seen, is a great film, but with Philip Seymour Hoffman as well as the town. It means The Place Beyond the Pines. So that was also a good movie. But Schenectady, New York, if you haven't seen it, what a powerful movie. See it. The author of the monograph was a native of Schenectady, New York. Was said by some to have had the highest IQ of all the war criminals who were made to face death by hanging. So it goes. Americans, like human beings everywhere, Americans, like human beings everywhere, believe many things that are obviously untrue. The monograph went on. Their most destructive untruth is that it is very easy for an American to make money. They will not acknowledge how, in fact, hard money is to come by, and therefore those who have no money blame and blame and blame themselves. This inward blame has been a treasure for the rich and powerful, who have had to do less for their poor publicly and privately than any other ruling class since, say, Napoleonic times. Many novelties have come from America. The most startling of these, a thing without precedent, is a mass of undignified poor. They do not love one another because they do not love themselves. Once this is understood, the disagreeable behavior of American enlisted men in German prisons ceases to be a mystery. Howard W. Campbell, Jr. now discussed the uniform of the American enlisted in World War II. Every other army in history, prosperous or not, has attempted to clothe even its lowliest soldiers so as to make them impressive to themselves and others, as stylish experts in drinking and copulation and looting and southern death. The American army, however, sends its enlisted men out to fight and die in a modified business suit quite evidently made for another man, and sterilized but unpressed gift from the nose-holding charity which passes out clothing to drunks in the slums. When a dashingly clad officer addresses such a frumpishly dressed bum, he scolds him, as an officer in any army must. But the officer's contempt is not, as in other armies, avuncular theatricality. It is a genuine expression of hatred for the poor, who have no one to blame for their misery but themselves. A prison administrator dealing with captured American enlisted men for the first time should be warned. Expect no brotherly love, even between brothers. There will be no cohesion between the individuals. Each will be a sulky child who often wishes he were dead. Campbell told what the German experience with captured American enlisted men had been. They were known everywhere to be the most self-pitying, least fraternal, and dirtiest of all prisoners of war, said Campbell. They were incapable of concerted action on their own behalf. They despised any leader from among their own number, refused to follow or even listen to him, on the grounds that he was no better than they were, and he should stop putting on airs, and so on. Billy Pilgrim went to sleep, woke up as a widower in his empty home in Ilium. His daughter Barbara was reproaching him for writing ridiculous letters to the newspapers. "Did you hear what I said?" Barbara inquired. It was 1968 again. Of course. He had been dozing. "If you're going to act like a child, maybe we'll just have to treat you like a child." "This isn't what happens next," said Billy. "We'll see what happens next." Big Barbara now embraced herself. "It's awfully cold in here. Is the heat on?" "The heat?" "The furnace. The thing in the basement. The thing that makes hot air come out of these registers. I don't think it's working." "Maybe not." "Aren't you cold?" "I hadn't noticed." "Oh my God, you are a child. If we leave you alone here, you'll freeze to death. You'll starve to death." And so on. It was very exciting for her, taking his dignity away in the name of love. Barbara called the oil burner man, and she made Billy go to bed. Made him promise to stay under the electric blanket until the heat came on. She set the control of the blanket at the highest notch, which soon made Billy's bed hot enough to bake bread in. And Barbara left, slamming the door behind her. Billy traveled in time to the zoo on Tralfamadore again. A mate had just been brought to him from Earth. She was Montana Wildhack, a motion picture star. Montana was under heavy sedation. Tralfamadorians wearing gas masks brought her in, put her on Billy's yellow lounge chair, withdrew through his airlock. The vast crowd outside were delighted. All attendance records for the zoo were broken. Everybody on the planet wanted to see the Earthlings mate. Montana was naked, and so was Billy, of course. He had a tremendous wang, incidentally. You never know who'll get one. Now she fluttered her eyelids. Her lashes were buggy whips. "Where am I?" she said. "Everything is all right," said Billy gently. "Please don't be afraid." Montana had been unconscious during her trip from Earth. The Tralfamadorians hadn't talked to her, hadn't shown themselves to her. The last thing she remembered was sunning herself by a swimming pool in Palm Springs, California. Montana was only 20 years old. Around her neck was a silver chain with a heart-shaped locket hanging from it between her breasts. Now she turned her head to see the myriads of Tralfamadorians outside the dome. They were applauding her and opening and closing their little green hands quickly. Montana screamed and screamed. All of the little green hands closed tight, because Montana's terror was so unpleasant to see. The head zookeeper ordered a crane operator who was standing by to drop a navy blue canopy over the dome, thus simulating earthling night inside. Real night came to the zoo for only one earthling hour out of every 62. Billy switched on a floor lamp. The light from the single source threw a Baroque detailing of Montana's body into sharp relief. Billy was reminded of fantastic architecture in Dresden before it was bombed. In time, Montana came to love and trust Billy Pilgrim. He did not touch her until she made it clear that she wanted him to. After she had been on Tralfamadore for what would have been an earthling week, she asked him shyly if he wouldn't sleep with her, which he did. It was heavenly. And Billy traveled in time from that delightful bed to a bed in 1968. It was his bed, an ilium, and the electric blanket was turned up high. He was drenched in sweat, remembered groggily that his daughter had put him to bed. She told him to stay there until the oil burner was repaired. Somebody was knocking on the bedroom door. "Yes?" said Billy. "Oil burner, man." "Yes? It's running good now. Heat's coming up." "Good." Mouse ate through the wire in the thermostat. "I'll be darned." Billy sniffed. His hot bed smelled like a mushroom cellar. He had a wet dream about Montana Wildhack. On the morning after that wet dream, Billy decided to go back to work in his office in the shopping plaza. Business was booming as usual. His assistants were keeping up with it nicely. They were startled to see him. They had been told by his daughter he might never practice again. But Billy went into the examining room briskly, asked that the first patient be sent in. So they sent him one, the 12-year-old boy, who was accompanied by his widowed mother. They were strangers, new in town. Billy asked them a little about themselves, learned that the boy's father had been killed in Vietnam, in the famous 5-day battle for Hill 875 near Dak To. So it goes. While he examined the boy's eyes, Billy told him matter-of-factly about his adventures on Tralfamadore, assured the fatherless boy that his father was very much alive still, in moments the boy would see again and again. "Isn't that comforting?" Billy asked. And somewhere in there, the boy's mother went out and told the receptionist that Billy was evidently going crazy. Billy was taken home. His father asked him again, "Father, father, father, what are we going to do with you?" Well, I want to thank you for joining me on part 2. If you didn't catch part 1, go back to my page and definitely watch that entire hour there, because there is some really good stuff in part 1. Let me tell you, part 2 done, chapter 5 over. You should have it in your head, and then you should go out and read it, as I did. Made myself get all the way through it. I think chapter 5, wow, what a powerful chapter. A lot of good stuff in there. And, well, who knows what's coming up. Might be diving into one of these, or maybe one of these eventually, but You'll never know what to expect on Billy Reed's books. Never will. And I love you. Thanks for liking and subscribing. We'll see you next time. Catch you on the flip flop, and see you next week.